So, last week, three big crucial votes. Well, two main ones. Obviously, Theresa May's deal returning to Parliament. I said last time I'd be very, very surprised if it passed. To no one's surprise, it did not pass. The other one was that there had to be, would we go for a no deal? That didn't pass, just by about, I think it was something like 4 votes, which to a no deal actually passing would be catastrophic, which shows you the amount of idiots in Parliament that would actually vote to put the UK into a no deal position is absolutely irresponsible. And as a member, any members of Parliament who actually voted for that are complete incompetence and should not be allowed to remain as MPs. They should be booted from the Parliament completely, as far as I'm concerned. And we also hadn't had a vote to extend Article 50, which it has been. Well, and we turn to Ian Dunt, because once again, this guy, on point. This is from Friday, this one comes from. So, it is time for this House to act in the national interest, Brexit Secretary Stephen Barclay said last night. It is time to put forward an extension that is realistic. I commend the motion put forward by the government to the House, and then 5 minutes later he walked into the no lobby and voted against it. I think that oh dear, that sums up everything in just one paragraph, but we'll keep on reading. The extent of the hypocrisy only grows when you look at the rest of the speech he made. His very first sentence praised the integrity of Keir Starmer's support for a second referendum. He then recognised the sincerity of Chris Leslie for leaving his party to join the independent group over Brexit. After that, he criticised Jeremy Corbyn's lack of principle or integrity, and then the entire time he was making a speech in defence of a proposition he was about to vote against. At some point, he must have written those lines knowing what he was about to argue and what he was going to do afterwards. He wasn't alone, though. Several other cabinet ministers voted against an extension of Article 50 last night, including Liam Fox, Chris Grayling, Andrea Leadsom, Penny Mordaunt, Liz Turner, and Gavin Williamson. It was a free vote, so there was no consequences to this, except as an exhibition of how battered and ruined the government is. It simply cannot maintain any discipline. Without opposition party support, the government couldn't have gotten the motion through, extending Article 50, and we would right now be committed to a no deal. That is effectively the stated will of the Conservative Party. It has turned into the millennialist death cult. Or perhaps it hasn't. Who knows? MPs' votes have become so divorced from what they claim to believe, it is hard to tell what's going on anymore. Many would have voted differently last night if the question was about conviction, but it was not. They knew they couldn't get away with it. They knew that the more responsible minds than their own would vote for an extension, so they could confidently vote against and not face the anger of their increasingly deranged echo chamber local association. The same applies to Theresa May's deal. The lots of MPs have no issue with it. A great many of those opposing it want it to pass. They just can't be seen to support it. That political psychosis is not restricted to the Brexit side. Labour's official policy, if it indeed can be said to have any official policies anymore, is to support a second referendum. But last night, it demanded its MPs abstain on an amendment demanding precisely that. At least that reflects the conflicting wishes of the Parliamentary Labour Party, which has several figures in impeccably opposed to another vote and others intent on supporting it. The People's Vote campaign has no such excuses. The clue to its purpose is in the name. Just next weekend, it is helping organise a march through central London to demand a people's vote. But last night it was trying to get MPs to abstain from supporting the very proposition it was set up to secure. The reason stems from deep-seated tactical disputes within Remain. The People's Vote camp believes that Labour used to behave towards Liberal Democrats with a sense of outrage that anyone else dare portray themselves as respecting a critical moment on Brexit. That has led them to regular attacks on the Norway option because it can present itself as an alternative to the People's Vote. By doing so, they have salvaged their own backup option and the very model Brexit critics will have to support if Britain does leave the EU. This last man standing approach means they refuse to put a second referendum before Parliament until they are absolutely sure it will pass. And that instance, which has become totally inflexible no matter how things develop, now sees them demand an abstention on their core principles. When the results came in for the vote, Jacob Rees-Mogg tweeted, "A second referendum, so the so-called losers vote has now been defeated in the House of Commons." So that's off the table. His previous tweet read, however, read, "The law still says we leave on the 29th of March. This was sent after no deal was defeated in the House of Commons. The hypocrisy and braven self-interest is now so severe that if you do not need to scroll down people's Twitter feeds, you can track it from one message to the next. The person of meaningless and failure of conviction is everywhere. Last night, Brexiteers who campaigned to leave the EU on the basis of returning sovereignty to Parliament voted against an amendment by Hilary Benn, which would have given Parliament control over the process. On Wednesday, the government whipped against its own motion on no deal, suggesting that it held the precise opposite view that one is committed to, the one that is committed to. Earlier in the week, Nigel Farage, who presents himself as the British patriot fighting against foreign interference in our sovereignty, lobbied far-right European leaders to veto a British petition of Article 50 extension authorised by the Westminster Parliament. This is madness, a system-wide level. Principles have crumbled to nothing. All that's left is a transitory tactical interest, fossilised strategic assessments, and perpetual trembling of terror of MPs in the face of a referendum result and zealots in the local associations. Many of the arguments against the People's Vote rely on warnings about damage to public trust in politics, but the spectacle of hypocrisy we're being treated to right now does more to affect that than 100 referendums could ever do. And I completely agree. This was absolutely insane, because if they hadn't abstained, there is a very good possibility that we could now have a People's Vote and that this could have gone through. But as is being said, what I now suspect, and this is my opinion I'm putting forward here, is that Jeremy Corbyn doesn't want a second referendum, but he also doesn't want to leave the EU, but he also recognises, like many Eurosceptics on the continent, that being in the single market and being in the customs union is actually a big bonus. So he is going to try his damn best to make sure that Britain ends up in a Norway-style deal. However, time and time, only a couple of months ago, we went over that Norway said it does not want the UK to join that bloc because it doesn't trust them. So that path has already been blocked. But there you go, and it's mind-boggling. It really is. It's absolutely insane. But there you go. I just want to read that last part again, because this sums it up completely. So many of the arguments against a people's vote rely on warnings about damage to public trust in politics. And this is the argument you see. Oh, you can't have another people's vote. It will undermine the democracy and stuff like that. What about what's going on in Parliament now? Does that not undermine democracy? What about what Jacob Rees-Mogg said? What about Nigel Farage? What about all these Brexiteers saying that they want Parliament, to hand back sovereignty to Parliament, and then voting against the Hillary Benn agreement, which would give control to Parliament? It's just so hypocritical. All these people, it's just maddening. It is absolutely maddening. But here, this is where we are. We are in a looney bin. Essentially, Westminster has become the new crazy house of people saying one thing, as we started off with in the article, and then doing something completely different. It is absolutely insane to think that at this moment in time, there seems to be no one rational who will stand up and actually say what needs to be said, which is Brexit is a terrible idea, we should not be doing this. Let us just vote to revoke Article 50. Let it be a complete free vote. But there we go.